Hey friends, in the last part we talked about data loading in SvelteKit, but in this part we're going to learn how to work with forms in SvelteKit. So let's talk about the project setup first. Here I'm going to open the sidebar. This is just a regular skeleton SvelteKit project with TypeScript. So you can go to source, and really there isn't anything special here. I just have a root layout here. Let me just close the sidebar. So I included Pico CSS. Someone asked me last time, hey, can I write global styles in the layout? And of course you can. You do it like this. You can import whatever you want here globally. Then you can define some styles here. I want some padding for the body, and I want some rounded corners for the inputs and buttons. And this is how you can easily do it in SvelteKit. That's basically the setup, and nothing special here. In the plus page Svelte file, I just have a title here and nothing special. And of course, I'm running the development server. So if I go here, I have these default styles using Pico, and here I just have a title. So if you want, feel free to catch up. Alright, before we get started, I'm going to keep it simple and I'm going to create a fake database. And we're also going to learn something neat, which is server-only modules. So remember how we said that if you type .server.ts for a file, is going to be only available on the server, and same for your data loading, this works for any other file. So for example, here is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to go to source and I'm going to create new file. I'm going to create the lib folder, which as you already learned is the default alias in SvelteKit. And now inside I can create either a file that's going to be called database server.ts, or I can create a folder, which I'm going to do here. I'm going to just say server. And now I can say database TS, which is honestly, even calling it generous, a fake database, because this is just going to be an array of to-dos. So let me just press enter. And here I'm going to start by defining a type to-do. So it's going to have an ID, which is going to be number. It's going to have a text, which is going to be a string, and completed, which is going to be a boolean. So now I'm going to create our fancy database, which is just going to be to-dos, and this is going to use the to-do type, which is going to be an array, right? And the first time I did it, I over-engineered it completely. I used a map or whatever, and I was like, okay, it's time to stop. Just keep it simple. An array is fine for me, right? And we don't need anything else, right? So let me just give one default example here so we can see that it works. And of course, I'm going to give it a date now for the ID because I really don't care. And now for the first one, we're going to say learn how forms work. And then we can say completed false. Alright, so let's just define a couple of functions and then we're done. So we can say export function get to-dos or whatever else you have, and we're just going to return the to-dos. And we really need to do this because we really can't just export this because it's going to be referenced forever. So we always have to run some other function that's going to return the new updated to-dos. And then let's keep it simple. I'm just going to scroll here. We can say export function add to-do. This is just going to accept the text, which is string, and we're going to create a to-do, which should satisfy this type, right? So we're going to say ID, date now. Let's just give it a text that we pass to the function, and we're going to say completed false. And now we just need to update the to-do. So we can say to-dos push. Oh dear, we're mutating data. Oh no. Okay, let's save this, and I can now define our remove to-do function. I can say export function remove to-do is going to take in an ID, which is going to be number, and this is going to be really simple. We're just going to reassign the value. We can say to-dos filter is going to take in a to-do, and we just have to say, hey, does this to-do not match the one we passed in, and it's just going to filter out the to-dos. And the last function I'm going to define export function clear to-dos. So you can clear the to-dos. And I'm just going to initialize the to-dos back to an empty array. Alright, so that's it. In the next part, we're going to start to talk about forms. This part is going to be a reintroduction to forms. And why do I say a reintroduction? Because we kind of know how forms work, but we really don't. From years of using JavaScript frameworks and avoiding forms like the plague, so we used our event handlers on buttons and etc. And we kind of know what happens when we submit a form, but how does a form actually work? So I'm going to talk about that in this section. So let's start first by defining what a form is. A form is a way to exchange information between the browser and the server. And it's just a container for form controls, or also called widgets, believe it or not, as said on MDN, with some optional attributes to configure how the form behaves. So let's have a look at that. Alright, so inside the editor, I'm going to go to routes and I'm going to open the plus page svelte file and I'm going to start by defining a form. So we can say form, which is interesting. So what is this method? Yeah, that's interesting, right? And now we can define an action. We can say login and now we can close the form and now we can specify some input fields. Or as we just learned, they're called form controls. So we can say input type, which is really important, just tells the browser what type of input this is. You can have a button, you can have checkboxes and etc. And this is the most important part. You have to specify a name because this is used on the server to get the data, right? And we can also say input type password. So the browser now knows this input field is a password and knows to treat it as such and to hide the user input. And now we can also give it a name. We can say password. And you don't really have to even finish closing this tag like this because these elements are also called void elements, which means they don't need a closing tag. But honestly, this is just habit. And now for the button, we can optionally say type submit, which is the default. And now you can say login. Let's just save it. And now we should get a beautiful form. So here in the form, the action attribute defines the location URL where the form's collected data should be sent, and the method attribute defines which HTTP method to send the data with. And the form attributes are optional. If you exclude, for example, the action, it's just going to get or post to itself. So first let's see how get works. The get method requests a resource from the server and appends the form data at the end of the URL. So what do you expect is going to happen when I type something in? So we can say test 1, 2, 3, 4, and remember we're doing a get request. So I can say login. Oh, interesting. So now it redirected us to the action, which is /login. And now we can see it appended the login, which is the user query params test and password 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is great to request a resource or maybe play around with query params. But in case of this form, this is actually insecure because you're showing the password in the URL, right? It's also not great for sending a large amount of data over the wire because the body is empty and that's why this gets appended to the end of the URL. So let's change this method to post and save it. And I'm also going to go back like this. And basically the post method is similar to get, but it can return a resource depending on the data sent in the request body. And no data is going to be appended to the URL and the data is going to be included in the body instead. So let's see how this works. I'm going to open the network tab. So now let's say test 1, 2, 3, 4 and pay attention to what's going to happen. Of course we get redirected again and we can see here we get a response. So we can see here is the payload, user test and the password 1, 2, 3, 4. And we can also view the source. So again, instead of being appended to the end of the URL, it's going to be sent in the body to the server as a list of key value pairs. And this is why the name attribute is so important, because if we didn't have the name attribute, then it wouldn't know what to assign to these values, right? And now on the server side, we can just say, oh, okay, give me the form data, whatever you have, and then we can just pluck the values from it. I'm going to show you how you can use API endpoints to work with forms. And this part is important for understanding how forms work, because it's going to give you more appreciation when you learn how simple SvelteKit makes working with forms in the next section. And this is also going to help us understand how that actually works under the hood. So next I'm going to create a to-dos folder with some route files. So I'm going to go to our editor, I'm going to open the sidebar, and if you have the SvelteKit extension, you can right click anywhere in your project or use the command palette in VS Code, and we can say SvelteKit files and you can create a route. So you can give it a name, we want to name the folder to-dos, and now you can select the files you want. So using spacebar, I can say page svelte. We also want server TS, this is going to be the data for the page, and we also want the endpoint for the form. So I'm going to press enter and now it's going to create it. So it's going to create the folder to-dos. So now we have here the page.svelte file. We have our data for the page, which we're going to fetch in a second. And here is our endpoint. So let me just close the sidebar. And first what I'm going to do is fetch the data for the page, which in our case is going to be the to-dos. And you might see this if you're using TypeScript, this satisfy page server load. I'm honestly not a huge fan of this because it makes the code harder to read for no actual benefit. So we can just remove this and I can just use it like this. We can say page server load and that's it. It works the same. Of course, satisfy is useful in other areas, but in this case, it really doesn't do anything. Alright, so because we're using TypeScript and our editor is super smart, I can just say const to-dos, and now when we start typing get to-dos, it's going to know that it should import this. So we can go here, and of course it's aliased, and we can just go here. So I'm going to say $. You would see what you would have to do if it wasn't alias. So you would have to do all of this nonsense, which is really awesome because it's alias by default. And if it's confused about this, you should restart your development server and it's going to work. So right now we can just return the to-dos inside of an object. Let me just save this and we can go here, and I love using pre, so we can say data. And now we should see the to-dos on the page if we go to /to-dos, and actually it's just going to show the one to-do. Alright, so we have the page data and I'm just going to make a to-do. So we're going to create two functions. We're going to need a function to add a to-do, which is going to take the event of type event, and let's also make another to-do. I'm going to say function remove to-do, and simple like that. So now we can go inside our template and we can loop over the to-dos. So let's go here, and I'm just going to say ul, and I have this each snippet, and now we can get the to-dos. We can say data to-dos as to-do, and now we can put it inside an li, and we can use a span. So now we can say to-do text, and now we're just going to use a form. And this might be weird to you if you're used to JavaScript, because you might be thinking, okay, in the past I just might have used the button here, have an event handler, so it's really going to feel weird that you're using forms in quotes for these small things, but don't be afraid, just use forms whenever you can, because that's the right way to do it. So I can say form, and then I can say on submit. So we're just going to use JavaScript in this case. We can say prevent default, which is provided by Svelte, and now we can say remove to do, and the method is going to be post. So let me just close the form. And now I can define a button, which is going to be type submit, which is optional, of course. And I'm also going to give it a class delete, which we're going to create in a second. I'm going to do this, and let's give it an emoji so we can say cross. Of course, you should make this more accessible. But a question is, for example, how are we going to send the ID to the server, right? So you know what to do to remove it. And the answer is quite simple. We can just create a hidden input field, which is going to send the ID to the server. So I can say input type hidden, and now I can give it a name, which we can grab on the server. And for the value, I can even say to do ID, so we can grab the value. Alright, sweet. So now we can save it, and we should see here is the first to do. And we're going to include some styles in a second to make this better, but we also need another form now. So this was the form for our to do and to delete them. So we can go here, let's create another form on submit. So you can say prevent default. And now we can use the to do function. We can say method post. Let's close the form. And this is straightforward. We can just say type text. I'm going to give it a name to do, and then button type submit, and we can just say add to do. And now let's add some styles. Oh, let me just do this. I can create a style tag. So now I'm going to say ul padding 0. Let's just give some styles for the li. You can say justify content space between align items center. And I'm also going to say for the span, text and form should be capitalized, and we just need to specify the delete and error classes. So I can say delete margin 0. This is just some styling because of Pico. So we can say background 0 and border none. Actually, background is going to be none and border is going to be none also. And now for the last error class we're going to be using in a minute, we can just say color tomato. Alright, so let's save this and everything should look a lot nicer. So you can see here it's still complaining. It says, okay, I have no idea what this is. And usually you can restart the development server. So you can go here, say npm run dev, and this should resolve it. And now it's going to generate whatever it needs. And you can see it's happy now. And as we learned previously, you can see how we didn't specify the action attribute for the forms because we're going to submit it to the same page. So now inside the server TS file, we're going to create the post and delete functions. So let me just scroll up here, and we already have the data here, so we really don't need this. I can just close this, I can go here, So let me just remove this response, and the first thing I'm going to do is actually declare a type data, and this is just going to be responsible for returning success and errors for the page. And this can be whatever you want. This is just the shape I decided on, so we can do things based on what is returned from this. So this is going to have a property success, which is a boolean, and it's going to have an object of errors. And how we type errors in TypeScript, you can use record, and then we say, hey, the key is a string. And then we can also maybe say unknown for the value, but we can also give it string, and this really isn't important. And now instead of using get, because this is going to be a post submit, we're also going to use post. And we need a request so we can get the form data, right? So we can go here, and now we can say const form data, so we can get the form data, await request, and TypeScript can help us out, so we can say request, okay, what is here? Form data, nice. And then we can get the to do, so we can say form data get to do, and this is the name of the field on the form, right? And now we need to make sure that this is a string, because if you hover over this, it's going to be form data entry value. TypeScript really doesn't like this, so you can just say string, and that's it. So now I'm going to create the data object. I can say const data, actually let's give it the type data, this is why we created it. So I can say by default false, and we can say errors, which is going to be empty. And now we can say if there is no to do, we can say data errors to do, and we can say required, which really isn't important. And then we should probably throw this and catch it on the front end, but really this isn't important, so we can just return JSON. We can use the helper from SvelteKit, let's say JSON data, and we can also give it a status, which is going to be 400. And now if everything works, I'm just going to go here and I'm going to say add to do. This is going to auto import it from our file. So you can see here it works everything nicely in the background. So let me just sort these things. Awesome. So we can say add to do, and we can just pass it a text, right? And then we can say data success true. And we can also return the JSON with the data. Let's do it like this. I can save it. And now this is the post done. And the delete is also going to be simple. So we can go export const. We want to use delete. Going to be the same type, request handler, async. We're going to the structure request. Let's say again, form data. Again, we're going to get the form. And you might think to yourself, this is tedious, and you can just subtract this inside the function or whatever. So you can say form data. And now we can say const to do ID, and we can say form data get, and we call it ID, right? So if I go here, let me just see, yeah, we gave it a name ID, and this is going to give us the to do ID. So we can go back here, and we need to cast it to a number because it's going to be a string. So we can do it like this, and then we can just import remove to do. So again, it's going to import it because TypeScript is smart like that. And now we can say remove to do, we can pass it a to do ID, and that's it. And let's return some JSON, and we can even say success true. And we can save this, and that's basically it. So now on our front end, we can fill in the function. So if I go here, here is the add to do. So let's fill that in. But first we're going to need the same type, so I can even scroll up here. Let's just copy paste it. You can already see how this is starting to be tedious. Now we need to copy over that part, data, right? And now I also need to keep track of whatever we're going to return, so I can create this variable. This is going to hold data, right? And now we can fill in the add to do. So we can say const form element event target. We need to say as HTML form element, so TypeScript is happy. And then we can say data new form data. And we can pass in the form element. And I'm also going to console log it out like this. And we're going to see that in a second, but first I'm going to ping the endpoint. So I can say const response, and now you have to say await fetch what we want to ping. We actually don't need to specify here because we have a reference to the form element. So we can say form element action. How awesome is that? And now we can give it some options. We can say method post, and we can pass the data. So now before I continue, let me just show you how that works. So I can open the developer tools. Let me go to the console, And now we can submit it or whatever, and we can see the form element is here. And now we have everything which has to do with that form. So we got the action. You can also get the method, but this can only be a post like this. So we type post. And you can also see the data. So instead of the form, let's log out data. So now if I type whatever, you can see form data. And let me see if I say log. And we can see the form data object and all the properties available on it, so we can get the value and etc. But I'm just going to remove this and let's just continue. So now that we get the response, we really need to populate this form, right? And this is why we did this data thing here. So now we can, for example, say const response data, and now we can just await the JSON that we return. So let me just console log it out so you can see what's going on. Response data. I'm going to clear this, so let's not submit anything. We can see success false, and now we get back the errors which is required. So we can use this in our template. But let's see what happens if we submit something. So we can say test, and now success is true and errors should be empty. So now basically what we need to say, we need to set the form variable. We can say form is equal to the response data. Another thing you can see is that this persists when you submit the form. And how do you reset the form? Well, you have access to the form, right? So it's simple as saying form element reset. As you can see, you get great auto-completion. So now if I type test and submit it, it should disappear. There's one more thing we have to do. So you can see how nothing updated on the page. Let me see. If I refresh the page, you should see, here are the to-dos that we typed in. Okay, so how can we fix this? Let me just close this so we have space to work with. And you can see here are the to-dos. And basically this is happening because we have to invalidate the page data and we have to rerun the load function. So in the data loading part, we learned that we can use invalidate, which we can use right here. So you can say await invalidate. Let's just use the nuclear option. We can say invalidate all. And I'm just going to save this. And now if you see, if I type in test and add it, it should update immediately. And awesome, it works. So you can see, let's say banana, you can see it added banana. All right, so sweet, this wasn't that bad, right? So let's do the one for removing the to-do. And also I can just remove this placeholder. And let's do it. And now again, I can say const form element and then target as HTML form element. I can say const data, new form data. So we just pass in the form. And now again, we can just say const response. We can say await fetch, use form element action. And let's pass it some options. So an interesting thing is that a form can only do a post and get. So even if you do a delete, it's going to do a post to the server. And that's basically to the way the HTTP standard is made. And that's really a story for itself. But basically SvelteKit is going to know what to do because we created a function delete. So if we say here method delete, it should work without a problem. And now we can also pass it the form. We can say body data. And remember, we have to invalidate the data, so we can say await invalidate all, which is already imported here at the top for us. All right, so now that's basically it. So we can just save this, and now let's see if it works. So let me just start deleting things. Okay, awesome. You can see how this works. All right, but for example, how do we show the feedback to the user? So right now there's nothing, right? But remember, we returned this data thing, so it has a success and errors, and this also gets updated, right? So now we can use this in the template. So here it is with the to-do. So let me just make space. I can just say if, and now we can say form. And because the next value might not exist, we can use this nifty trick. We can say errors. And because the to-do might not exist, we can also use a question mark. And now we can create the p tag, which is going to have that class of error that we made. And now we can say this field is required or whatever else you want. And let's also do one for the success. So here we can say if, and now we can say form. If there's success, we can also give it a paragraph, add a to do, and let's give it some emoji. We can say party. So right now, if I submit the form, the user should see the feedback, which is me. So the field is required. Awesome. So now let's add something. We can say banana, add a to do. And how awesome is this? Then we can of course see everything in the network tab. So let's see how this works. If I go here and submit nothing, you should see 400 to do is empty. And if we submit something else, we should see new to dos, which is going to be test. And you can see in the preview, and the response is the data which returns. So this is the raw response. And here you can see errors, success. And for the other one that failed, we can go here, you get the errors back. And yeah, that's basically it. So this was basically just an exercise so I can show you that it really doesn't matter what you return. It's basically up to you how you want to handle the error validation, which leads us to the next part. So this taught us a lot about forms and endpoints, but this is not a great user and developer experience. And why is that? Because, for example, this only works with JavaScript. So you can see here, for example, how we had to prevent the default form behavior. Now we had to go here. Even if we have a server right here, we had to implement all of this ourselves. We had to use fetch, which is really tedious. So imagine how it would look like with a more complicated form. We had to invent our own wonky validation, like this thing is not ideal. I wouldn't use this, right? We also had to use fetch and invalidate all, which is the nuclear option, right? And really the framework should do more for you. And this is why you should use SvelteKit form actions, and in the next section I'm going to show you why they're so awesome. So finally, let's talk about SvelteKit form actions. So remember how inside a standalone plus.server.ts endpoint you can use functions that map to HTTP verbs like get, post, and delete, like we've done it here. So you can see delete, post, and whatever else you want. But form actions take this idea a step further. You can define methods that map to an action inside a plus page.server.ts file. So you can go here and you can export an actions object, which is going to map to the actions in your form. I'm going to convert the previous example to use form actions. First, I'm going to delete this endpoint file because we're not going to need it anymore. So I can close it and I can go to the sidebar and let me just press delete and we can move it to trash because we don't need it. And now inside of here we can define the form actions. Nothing else changes about this file. You still use it to fetch the data for the page, but now you can also define form actions. So let's start with creating actions for adding, removing, and clearing the to-do items. So this is how you do it. You can say export const actions and it uses the type actions, which is going to be imported for you. So let's put it at the top. And now you can give it an object. So this is going to use default if you don't have any actions on your form like this. But if you defined a named action which you're going to use, then you can't use default anymore. So now let's just define the actions we have. And this is really simple and awesome. Because also remember when we use post, right? So if I go here and where is it in our template? Let me just go here. So for example, here it was for adding the to-do. But now what if you want to clear the to-dos or do something else or have 3-4 actions or have different forms? Now this starts to get hairy because every method is going to be post. So now you probably need to include some query params or have some hidden fields so you know on the server what you should do based on what it gets, right? And this is really tedious and annoying, and form actions are amazing because of this. So let's just define our form actions. So we're going to have one that's going to be add to do. We can say async. And also remember, this takes in an event object like we've seen. Everywhere where you have something with data loading, you're going to have this object. We already learned about it, so you can have cookies, fetch, locals, params, or whatever else. Here you're going to take in our request from here, and let's also add remove to do. So you're going to say remove. This is also going to be async, and it's going to take the request. And we can also say clear to-dos. And you can honestly keep it like this because this is just going to be the function that we created, but let's just be more clear what this is. So I can just give it an empty function. I can just say clear to do's, and this should auto import it for us. And let me just save everything, and everything works. All right, sweet. So now we're going to see how much less code we're going to write. So first let's fill in add to do. I'm going to go here. So I can say const form data await request. It has form data on it. And now we can say const to do, and now we can use form data. We can say get to do. Let's turn this into a string. And now we're going to do some error validation, which is going to be way easier than what we did before. So now we're going to say if there is no to do, SvelteKit has a handy fail function that we can return a status and whatever else we want. So we can say return import fail, which is going to import the function if we go here. So here it is, fail. And now let's see the argument. So we can give it a status. We can say 400. And now again, this is up to you. You can return whatever you want. So in our case, let's actually return the value so we can use it in case the form gets reset. Then we can just repopulate it. So we can return the same value. We can say to do. And now we can say missing, true, or whatever. And this is going to be available on the same form prop that we've seen, but now it's official by SvelteKit. Alright, so that handles the error case. And let's just import add to do. And same as before, we pass it to do. And now we can just return success true. And basically let me save this. And now let's also fill in the remove to do. Again, we can say form data request form data. Let's say const to do ID. And let's just say number, because we already know. And we can actually, let's just get the ID. Sometimes TypeScript is overzealous. And this is because we need to also include await request. Alright, so now it's happy. See how TypeScript saves your bacon? I would notice this and I would waste minutes of my life. Alright, sweet. So now let me just scroll up here. And now I can say remove to do. Again, I'm going to press enter. This is going to import it. Let's just pass to do ID. Everything should work great. And we can return success. Alright, let me save this. And this is it, basically. And you can already see how much less code this is. Alright, so now let's update our template. So if I go here, and now I can remove all of this nonsense. I can remove these functions. Let me remove this. I'm going to remove this type. Deleting code feels better than writing code, to be honest. We don't need invalidate. Alright, sweet. So now we have export let data. This won't change at all. Now we have another thing from SvelteKit, export let form, which is going to be of the type action data. And let me just, instead of data, we're going to say form. And right now there's nothing, but we're going to see how we can update our template. So now we want to use JavaScript here. So we can remove on submit for the post. So this is just going to stay post. And now we can define the action, right? So how do we do it? And this might look like magic first. Okay, so check this out. So we say action, question mark, and we can say remove to do, but that wouldn't work, right? Because this is a query param and SvelteKit won't know that this is an action or you're trying to invoke an action. So how do you do it in SvelteKit? Well, you just add a slash here and now SvelteKit knows that you want to call this function. Alright, awesome. So now let's update the other form. How good does this feel, right? So we can delete this code and now we can say action. What was it? Question mark slash add to do. And now we can update this. So we return form missing. And now we can keep this as this field is required. And also let me show you something else what is cool. So we want to clear the to-dos, right? So if I add this button, we can say clear. Okay, but how do we do it? So let me first add a class, which is going to be secondary. And this is of course optional, but I like having it. Let me just save it so you can see here we have clear. Okay, but how can we invoke other functions, right? Because we specified here that this form should invoke add to do. Well, simple. This isn't a SvelteKit API or anything. This is using web standards. So on the button, you can use this property, form action. If specified, it overrides the action attribute of the button's form owner. Okay, so this is going to override it. Awesome. So let's see, form action. And now we can again say question mark slash clear to-dos and save it. How awesome is this? And here nothing changed, we again return success, so this should work. One downside though is that this type generation is sometimes wonky, like here. For example, here you can see it's form missing, but you're going to see that this should work. So when I go here, let's first see the error handling. So I can say add to do, this field is required. Also notice how our browser refresh, because we're not using JavaScript. And this is why your app is going to be more resilient, because it's going to work before JavaScript. So you can see how we get back the to do and missing. So basically the editor doesn't know about this, but what you can do, you can press Ctrl P, type the pointy boy, you can say restart language server, and sometimes that's going to do it. Sometimes you need to restart the development server. And really, if continues erroring like this, just ignore it, because you can see everything works just fine. Alright, so let's see, we can say test, we can submit it. How awesome is this? Alright, let's see if we can delete it. Awesome. So now let's add it back again. Let's add more things. And now let's see if clear is going to work, right? Awesome. How beautiful is this? So let's also look at the network tab, right? Let's see what's going on. I'm always curious about that, you know me? So for example, we can just add a banana. So we can see all this junk here, and we can see how this is parsed. So in the headers, it did /todos. You can see this is a query param, but because it uses a slash, SvelteKit knows it should invoke this function. And you can see the payload here. So it parsed the query string here, and you also get the form data, which is really awesome. So you can see the preview and the response here, which is going to be the HTML document, of course. So let's try removing this, and this should also update. Of course, it does a complete refresh. You can see here is the ID and the parse query string parameters. And again, actions might look like magic, but they're just a URL that invokes a function. As you've seen, SvelteKit makes it special by including a slash that lets SvelteKit know, hey, I should execute these methods. You can see how this is really an awesome mental model. You can have as many actions as you want and forms and etc. You can just go here to your actions object, and you can just add a new one. Let's talk about progressive form enhancement. So we've seen how already this is really awesome, so we can add our to-dos or whatever else. But the page refresh is really not a big deal, but what if we want to preserve that awesome single page application experience? And this is what progressive form enhancement is for. Let's pretend that in this case the user doesn't have JavaScript because it can fail for whatever reason, right? Your form is still going to work and etc. But if the JavaScript is available on the page, we can enhance the user experience. So we can do client-side validation or whatever else you want. And let's see how simple this is to do. And remember, the point is not that your site should work without JavaScript, but before it, because JavaScript can fail, and this is what makes your app more resilient. So remember in the first example how we had to do everything by hand. Well, basically, SvelteKit does that for you and wraps everything in a pretty bow in a neat use enhance Svelte action. This is unrelated to form action. This is Svelte actions, which let you hook into lifecycle methods of elements. So how do we do this? This might sound like super complicated, but believe me, it's one line of code if you count the import. All right, so how do we make this work? We can go here to the form, and now we can start using a Svelte action. We can say use enhance, and as you start typing enhance, you can import it. So you can see here at the top it imported enhance from app forms. Ah, awesome. So now let me just copy this over. That's it. That's all, trust me. So now we can go here to the other form. We can say use enhance. Ah, interesting. So what happens now? You can see now, if you look here, the page isn't going to refresh. Ah, awesome. How awesome is this? Say test or whatever. And now we can also remove the to-dos, and notice now we get that awesome experience. But let's see what's going on in the network tab, right? So let me just do delete like this, and now instead of refreshing the page, right, is going to use JavaScript and client-side rendering because the JavaScript is available on the page. So you can see fetch request, and here it is. You can see preview, it returns the data, status, and the type, which you're going to look into. Here is the raw response. And let me just close this. So when you submit the form using the use enhance action, it's going to update the form. So right here is going to update this. It's going to update the $page.form store, and it's going to update the $page.status property. It's also going to reset the form and rerun the load function for the page. So you don't have to use invalidate all yourself. And in a case of a redirect, it's going to use goto. So you can see if we go here and add whatever, it's going to work just great. And also the error handling, so you can see here it updates live. And this is why I wanted to show you previously how you can work with forms using an API endpoint so you can understand actually what SvelteKit does under the hood. Otherwise, you would just use this and treat it as black magic, which I honestly don't like. I love magic, but I also love understanding how things work. And let's look at the implementation, which really isn't spooky. I honestly maybe don't understand half of this, but if you can at least understand the general idea of what it's doing, and this is going to look really familiar. Okay, so when I look at something like this, I'm like, okay, junk, I really don't care about this series. Oh, here it is. Here is the magic sauce. Here is the Svelte actions. I already know about Svelte actions, right? So I can see, okay, export, enhance. It accepts a form, right, and a submit value. And we can already start seeing some familiar things here. We can ignore this. Here it has a handle submit. So it really does the equivalent what we've done before. It prevents the default behavior of the form. Here it specifies an action, then it does again that things with the form data, right? Oh, how familiar is this, right? You really don't need to understand these things, but get a high level concept of how it understands. And this is going to give you more confidence in working with these things, right? And here is the abort controller, so you can prevent requests and etc. And really, here is the response. So it's trying a response. Ah, this looks really familiar, right? Look, await fetch, action, method post. Here is some special sauce headers, right? Really not important. And you can see some other things which you can dive into. And basically, that's it. And here is a cleanup if you know what Svelte actions are. Alright friends, how cool is this? But now I want to show you how you can customize the enhance action, and we're going to use it to show a loading UI. So how can we customize the behavior of the use enhance action? And you can do it by providing a submit function that runs before the form is submitted. So here you can do your validation or whatever, and then you can also return a callback that has access to the result. So let's see how this looks like. So here, for example, where I have add to do, we won't add it for the removing of the to do. So we can just go here, and where it use enhance is, now we can specify a function. So you can just say add to do. You can name this whatever you want, whatever floats your boat, like banana, right? So we can go here, and now we can define a function, and I'm going to do it using an arrow function because I want to use the type, which wouldn't be possible using a regular function. So I'm going to say const add to do. And this is of type submit function. So this should import it from app forms. All right, so now here we have the first argument, which is going to be the input. And now, let me just do it like this. And now inside of here, you can do something before the form submits. So now maybe you can here do validation of the inputs or whatever, because we're going to see what you have access to here. And this is maybe you don't really want to submit the form to the server, right, for no reason, if you can already validate the data. For example, let me say that I'm typing my name here, and it's really a frustrating user experience if you find out your name is taken once you submit the form. I want to know immediately if my name is taken. You know what I'm talking about. How many annoying sites do that, right? So this is something you can do here. And then you can provide a return function. So you can say return async, and this has options. So you can do it like this, and this is do something after the form submits. And you can see, because we're using our custom callback functions, the form isn't going to work using the use enhance method, and we're going to see how to make that work again. So let's just see what do we get. So we can say console log input, and now we can also go here, options. Let me save this, and now I'm going to open the developer tools. Let's just go to the console, and now let's just type something in. So this is really interesting. So for the input, we get this object, we get an action, which is a URL. You can get cancel methods, you can cancel the request. This is the abort controller, which you can also use for canceling requests. Here is the form data itself, right? How awesome. And you have access also to the form element. And here is very similar. For options, it has an action, it has the form data, the form itself, but it also has a result, which we're going to learn about in the next section. How awesome is that? And here we have something which we can use. So we can do whatever we want here, and we can call this update. And this update function is basically going to run the logic it would do otherwise if you didn't specify a custom callback. Otherwise, you would have to re-implement all that fetch nonsense yourself and etc. But SvelteKit really makes this easy. So let's look at a real use case for this. You can't always rely on a fast response from the server, in which case the user might leave your site because it looks completely broken. So what I'm going to do next, let me just close this. I'm going to go inside page server TS, and I'm going to define a sleep function, which is going to simulate a slow response. So right after the load function, we can define it here, and we can say async function sleep is going to take in milliseconds. And then we can just say return new promise like this. We can use resolve, and we can say set timeout, and we can just resolve it in whatever time we pass in. So I can save this. And now that we have this nice helper, you can put this in your utils or whatever. Let's just go here. And before we add a to-do, we're going to simulate a slow network. You can also do it from your developer tools or whatever. But I can just say await sleep, and we can say 2 seconds. So now if I go here and add a beautiful banana, you should see, oh, there's no feedback, and the user is already starting to be frustrated. They're like, okay, what is happening? And in this case, nothing is happening because we lost the default behavior. So if I go here, let me just the structure update, and now we can say await update, and we can also remove this output because we don't really need it here. me just remove this. I'm going to save it. So now, again, let's try adding something. Again, nothing is happening. It's going to take 2 seconds. And you see, and we already submitted the old one. So now we get 2 bananas, which is awesome. 2 bananas is better than 1. Okay, so how can we give the user something useful, right? So let's first define some state in our component. So we can say let loading false. All right, so now you know that here you can do something before the form submits, and here you can do something after it's done. So do you already know the solution? So of course we can go here, we can just say loading automatically to true, and let me just bump this up. So we can say loading false when it's done, right? We can say false and it's going to update. And now also let me update the template. So if I go to adding our to-do, Pico has this awesome thing, which is aria busy. So if aria busy is true, it's going to show a loading spinner, which is really awesome. So you can say aria busy, and we already have a boolean, right? It's the loading. How awesome is this? And we can also give it a conditional class. We can do it like this, class secondary. What is the boolean? Loading. Oh, let me just save this. How awesome is this, friends? So now if we go here, and I can say 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. Now this should show a loading spinner here because it's going to take 2 seconds. All right, let's see. Oh, how awesome. And we can also even make this better. So here where the text is, let me just do it like this. And now we can just do if it's not loading, show the text. So you can just say add to do. Let me just save this. And we can put this on 1 line, but who really cares? Okay, so now let's go here and we can start adding something. All right, so now it's going to take 2 seconds, and awesome. And you can also disable the input or whatever you want. All right, so how awesome is this? So now, for example, if you get an error or success state, you can show a toast notification to the user, which is really awesome, but I'm going to leave that to you as an exercise. Alright friends, let's learn how we can do form validation in SvelteKit. And first I'm going to show you the hard way, and then I'm going to show you how you can use a popular schema validation library like Zod and show you a couple of tricks along the way. And I'm going to create a login route using this first example. So this is from pluspage.svelte. We can just copy over this form, and now I'm going to close it, and let's go to the routes. We can say SvelteKit files, create route. We're going to create a login route. We're going to need pluspage.svelte, and we're going to need pluspage server TS for the form actions. So let's press enter, and now you should have a login folder. So here is our page, and here is our endpoint. So we can just remove everything here. We're not going to need it. And here, let me just copy this form over. So we really don't need to specify an action here because it's going to point to itself, which is already /login, but I'm going to import use enhance like this, which is awesome, and I can even specify they should use TypeScript. Alright, so let's save it. Alright, so let me go to that route. We can say /login, and now if I submit it, nothing is going to happen, right? So we can say required, which is natively supported in the browser. So now if I try to submit, it's going to say, hey, please fill out this field. But there's a problem with this. Any hacker man can come along and they can inspect this and they can say, okay, required, not today. Type password, I really feel like you should submit an email today. And this is going to cause chaos, okay? And this is why you should always do server-side validation. Alright, so I'm going to close this and I'm going to remove required for now because it's going to get in the way. And now I can go to the page.server.ts file and we can say export const actions. It has the type actions, which should be imported. So we can use the default method and we can just the structure request like this, and awesome. Alright, so let's get started. First we need to get the form data, of course, const form data. We can say await request form data, and now we need to get the input values, so we can say user, and we can say form data get user, and then I can just copy this over, and we can say password. And of course we need to turn this into a string. And you can already see how this is starting to feel tedious, because imagine if you had something more complicated. And yeah, I'm just painting a picture here. So alright, so here is something else we need to do. Now we need to invent our own way, again, how to handle errors. You can do this many ways, but I'm just going to have an errors object, and if the error object has anything in it, we're just going to return the errors. So I can say const errors, it's going to be an object. Let's just give it a type like this. So remember record, and we can say the key should be a string and unknown. And this really isn't important. So this should be empty. And now let's do the validation, right? So let me just make space here so it's readable. And now again, now you have to do your own validation, and you might not be even thinking about these things. So for example, you might be thinking, okay, if the user doesn't exist, maybe that's it. But you also need to check that they're not screwing with you. So you have to say type of user. So if this is a string, right? And then if this fails, we can say errors user required, but really doesn't matter what you say here. Okay, so now we have to do the same thing for the password. So now we have to say password or type of password isn't equal string, and I'm already falling asleep. I don't know about you. And now we can say errors password required. And all right, this is how everything is going to work. So now we can say if. So now we need to get the length. We can say object keys, and we can pass errors. And now we can say, hey, is there any errors here? And then we can do something. And also here I can just fix this. It's not free S's, so you can just do it like this. Awesome, that is resolved. And now we can do this validation. So now we can return fail. So if I press enter, it's going to import it. Let's see at the top. All right, that worked fine. And now we can give it status, and we're going to return some data. And let's just make this more readable. So I'm going to define it like this. I can say const data. Okay, so the first thing I want to return is some data, right? And then I'm also going to return the errors. All right, but how do I return this data? And basically, I just want to turn the form data into some object we can get. So we can say object from entries, and we can pass it form data. And this is going to return an object instead of form data. And we can just return the errors. And that's basically it. It really doesn't look complicated, but again, it's really tedious, right? And for the last part, we can say if everything was successful, let's learn about a new thing. Okay, so how can we redirect? Okay, SvelteKit also has a useful method for this. So we can throw a redirect. You can auto import it. So it's going to import redirect. Okay, now awesome. Let's see what are the options. So you can specify a status, let's say 303. And where do we want to redirect? Well, let's pretend the user is logged in and now they can go to the to-dos. All right, so now we really didn't use the validation in the template, but let's say if we type test 1, 2, 3, 4, it should redirect to to-dos. All right, awesome. All right, so now we can go to the template, and again, we need the form data. So we can say export let form, which is going to be action data. Let me just do my snippet here so you can see what's going on. All right, so this is really cool. So for example, if we don't specify anything, we're going to get this shape. So you're going to get data, user, password, empty, and the errors, right? Which is really awesome. And then let's say we specify the username or whatever, you can see here is the user. So now because the form resets, we can use this value here. So let me just show you. And let me just go here. I'm just going to make space here. We can go to the user, and now here we can say value. And now we can say form data. If user is on here, we can use that value. Otherwise, we can say, hey, just leave it empty. And then let's do some validation. We can say form errors user. Let's also not forget a question mark. And we can also give it a paragraph. Let's see, paragraph class error. And now we can say name is required. All right, so let's copy this over. We're going to do the same for password. You can already see this is easy. So we can say password, and you can say password is required. All right, so let's save everything and let's specify some style. So you can say style error color tomato. So now we can see here password is required. Let me just remove this so you can see we get both name is required. So if we input our password, name is required, but if we do this, everything should work great and it should redirect us. Awesome. Let me just refresh for good measure. And now we can see what's going on. Again, here, password required, and that's how we can output this in the template. All right, this is really cool. But again, as I said, this is really tedious. Imagine if you had something more complicated. Now you have to do all of these if statements. You need to get the data from the form. And this is where Zod comes in. And Zod is basically going to validate the schema, which you can set up yourself. So you don't really need to do this if or whatever. And the template is actually going to stay the same, which is really awesome. So I'm going to open the terminal. Let's stop the development server. And now I can say pnpmi Zod. And I'm going to use another package, which is Zod form data, which is really awesome because we can just pass the form data or URL search params, which we can parse, and it can validate that. So let me just do that quickly. And another awesome thing about Zod form data is a great example of using web standards, because that package was made for Remix, but because Remix and SvelteKit use the web platform, it works flawlessly. Alright, so let's start the development server again. Let's close this. So now let's change this example to use Zod for validation. And I'm just going to remove everything here, just so we can see how that works. Alright, so let's make some space. And now again, we just need the form data. So we can say await request form data. So now we can define the schema. And how do you do that? And we can say login schema. And we're going to use Zod form data. So we can say ZFD, and this should be auto imported. Awesome. And then we can say form data. And now you can define your schema instead of doing all those if conditionals, right? And what are the fields? We can say user. So we can say ZFD type of text, or you can even use Zod, which also has validation methods. And we also have password on it, which should be ZFD text. And this is really awesome. All right, so we need to parse it. So we can say const result, and we can say login schema. And on the login schema, we can invoke safe parse. And we're going to pass it the form data. And this is why this library is awesome. So let me just scroll up. And I'm just going to put it like this. And now we need to check if there was an error. So you can do it by saying, hey, if the result wasn't a success. And now we can do the same thing that we did before. So I can say return fail. We can give it 400 and we can return the data. You can see what is going on. So you can say data. And this is awesome. All right. So how do we return back the data? I can just say object from entries, and let's pass form data back in. And now for the errors, which is more interesting. You can learn more about this by reading the Zod documentation. From the result, you get error, and we can flatten it. And now we can also return the field errors. So let's return the field errors. And lastly, let's also do a redirect. So we can say throw redirect if everything is fine, 303 / to-dos. All right, let's save everything, and you can see already how this is so much nicer and easier. And now you can store these schemas in a separate file. You can abstract this validation logic in another file, and you can pass it form data and the schema, and you can return back the data and errors if you want and make it reusable. And as I said before, you shouldn't have to change anything here. And now when you go here, let's see if this works. You can see data, user password, and the errors. And of course, I don't know how to type because you can see here we're using 2 R's. And here, let me just see errors. Yeah, left. We can just do it. And let's see. Okay, now name is required, password is required. So I can say test. Awesome. So now if we just do this and let's submit. Okay, so now let's do both, and this should redirect us to the do's. Awesome. How awesome is this, right? Of course, this isn't the only way to do validation with Zod, and you can read more about error handling in Zod from the documentation, but form validation honestly deserves its own video. Alright friends, in the last part I want to show you some advanced enhanced action customization. For example, I mentioned how actions can be invoked from other pages, and this example I want to reuse this login form. So I just want to copy it over, let me just close it, and here in the page Svelte, which is our homepage or root, we can just replace it, and let me just save it. So now if you go here, and you would maybe expect that this would work, and if we go here, of course it wouldn't, it's undefined because the form didn't get updated, because it has no idea. Even if we have to say action, it should go to login, right? Because we're inside our root, and we're going to basically target the /login. So now we go here, again, nothing is happening, the redirect should only work. So now if we type anything here, it should redirect to to-dos. But how do we make this work? And we can make this work customizing the use enhanced action. So for example, I can go here, and let me just say login, and now we can go here, and I can say const login, which is type submit function. So it's going to get auto imported for us. And let's just do this. And now we can return the callback, which is going to be async. So previously we learned about update, right? And you might be thinking, okay, maybe if I try update, but you're going to see this isn't going to work, right? Because this isn't going to update the form data for other routes, but only for itself. All right, so here is something also we can do. Besides update, you get this awesome result. So let me just console log out result, and let's open the developer tools. And now when we submit it, you can see we return from the action type failure, status, and even the data with the data and errors. And how awesome is this? So you can see right now it's not even going to redirect because again, we provided a custom callback. So now when I say test 1, 2, 3, 4, this should be a redirect. So you can see redirect, status, and the type. How awesome is this? So now you can use the apply action method, which unlike update, can update this form property and the store for the form from anywhere. So you can first get the result like we did it now, but now let me just say await, and we can import apply action. So it even tells you what it does. The action updates the form property of the current page with the given data and updates the store. And in case of an error, it's going to redirect to the nearest error page. You're going to see how this works in a second. So you can say apply action, and now you can pass the result, right? So look at this. So now when we, let me just close this. So now when we press login, it's going to return the data which can be reused anywhere. How awesome is this? So now name is required. And now if you say test 1, 2, 3, 4, now we should redirect to deduce. And how awesome is this? Because now you can reuse this anywhere. And you don't have to, again, specify the same actions and return the same data. All right, but let's have a closer look at apply action. So let's just console log the result, which we already did, but what does apply action really do? And really it depends on the result.type. So if we go here, let me just remove this so we can make space and say result type. And now we have everything here from success to whatever else. So you have error, failure, redirect. So let's say, for example, that we only want to do something when it's a success, otherwise it won't do anything. We can just go here, then you can do whatever you feel like doing here, and then you can say await, apply action, and you can pass it back the result. And this is only going to do what this logic does in the case the result type is a success and nothing else. So for example, in this case, this is only going to redirect us on success, or if there's a redirect. So for example, let's change this to redirect, but this really isn't going to return data for validation, etc. So if I press login here, we shouldn't get validation back because this is only going to apply the logic related to this type of result type. So if you press login, you can see it doesn't work, but it's only going to do this if the type is redirect. So now it gets back redirect, and that's how that works. And this might be really confusing at first, the difference between update and apply action, but just so you're aware of it, and when you run into that situation where you need it, then you can be like, okay, maybe I should go back and rewatch this, or I should read the documentation. So based on the result type, if you get success and failure, is going to update the form, the $page.form and $page.status, regardless where you're submitting form. This is the difference between apply action and update. And if it catches a redirect, it's going to invoke goto and use result.location. And if it gets an error, it's going to render the nearest plus error.svelte page. This way you can customize the behavior of the use enhance action and dip in and out of the regular behavior when you need it. Alright, so that's everything you should know to feel confident working with forms in SvelteKit. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to support me, you can find the Patreon in the description. Thank you for watching and catch you in the next one. Peace.